Well, hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm your host for today, and we're going to be talking about securing the business. Now, before we go into this topic too much, let's start talking about, well, why would you care about this concept? I mean, if you as a CISO tell the business, I've got a critical vulnerability on some application, the business won't understand why they should care about this issue. Well, just let IT fix it and leave me alone. Is probably what's going through their heads. However, if you say we're going to take down the business's ability to book new deals until this internet-facing critical vulnerability is fixed, now you got their attention very quickly. You get to have a discussion on how much this will impact the company, if it's worth doing such a thing. You're going to run into power struggles and the like. You're going to have some discussions about this, and today's episode, we're going to talk about how to do those effectively and to prepare for it. Now, if you're wondering where in the world is G-Mark, I'm in Glasgow, Scotland, up here for a couple of days, and yesterday I had a chance to go over to Edinburgh and saw a statue of Adam Smith. If you remember Adam Smith, 1776 Wealth of Nations, and by the way, the statue, he's got his hand on something that looks an awful lot like a Dalek. Anyway, let's start with Adam Smith at the very beginning, and because he introduced the concept of process when he wrote about how a pin was made at a pin factory. Now, Al-Belushi et al. Write in their 2021 paper entitled Identification of Critical Business Processes, a Proposed Novel Approach, references should be in the show notes, that a process is a series of interrelated processes, sort of sounds like a circular definition, but a series of interrelated processes and actions conducted in the sense of an occurrence to accomplish a common end result for the user of the product. Okay, and critical business processes are those directly affecting an organization's ability to protect its assets, meet its critical needs, and satisfy mandatory regulations and requirements, and must be restored immediately after disruption to maintain business continuity. Okay, so we can start to see how this is all tying together in our security models. Now, Christina Cravens at Red Jack writes that identifying critical business functions also helps your organization allocate resources effectively. And she continues, additionally, identifying critical business functions allows your organization to develop contingency plans in the event of a cyber attack. She offers a 4-step process to identify critical business functions. Create a list, prioritize functions and processes, create an asset inventory, and document results. Now, if you think about it, as a CISO or as a security leader, you really need to identify the critical business processes to the IT applications that support them. Let's take an example. Let's create a hypothetical one where you're the CISO for a restaurant, like an Olive Garden or an Applebee's or something along those lines. And you can anticipate customers will be using your website to reserve a table at one of your fine restaurants. In other words, that's a critical business process which ultimately starts a revenue funnel. Now, this critical process directly results in customer experience based on, well, the IT systems. If the IT doesn't work or it works poorly, customers will likely abandon the process of making reservations to come to your restaurant and simply go somewhere else. You've just lost money, and you might not even know why or the fact that they were there in the first place. So an important thing to do is always validate with the business units if they believe that this is a critical business process before moving forward with security solutions. Now, once we've identified that something is a critical business process, we should focus on understanding what IT systems are needed to support this process. Is it just a single web app? Are there mobile applications? Is it a third-party app like OpenTable? So you need to understand how many applications exist just to book a table. Now, for the sake of simplicity, let's say there's only two, a web app and a mobile application. Now, what happens if you want to do system maintenance on the system? Well, are there windows of opportunity when applications maintenance can be performed? Perhaps the restaurant is closed from 11 p.m. to 10 a.m., and there might be an opportune time to make website changes since most customers aren't booking reservations at that time. Maybe not great for your staff having to work the midnight shift, but you got to work around the business schedule and keep things up and running. Now, what happens if there's a critical vulnerability on your internet-facing website? Do you take the site down immediately? Or do you roll the dice and wait till the next change window? You see, there's a race condition going on between you fixing it and some attacker exploiting it. So who gets to make those decisions? Does the CISO have the authority to turn things off if they can't get in touch with the CIO? If the CISO isn't the ultimate authority, who is it? Is it the CIO? Is it the business owner, the CEO? a chief risk officer. I write and I do tabletop exercises, and one of the scenarios that I put in there is that one of the critical people that you need to notify who makes a decision is on an airplane, and they can't reach her for the next couple hours. Do you have provisions in your documentation for an alternate decision maker? Because if there's a fast-moving crisis situation and there's only one person that's authorized to make a decision, you've got a critical flaw in your plan. And so what you want to think about, beyond just the scope of what we're talking about here, is do you have sort of a defense in depth in terms of your decision-making trees? If the primary person is not available, do you have a designated alternate? And if neither of those are available, do you have a break glass type of scenario where you open up the envelope and you read, hey, Billy, guess what? You get to make this decision today. Think it through. Because if you got one of my exercises, I'm going to test you on it. Now, let's say, for example, the system has to be down for a day. Is there a business continuity plan that says, well, here's our process for taking reservations until then? Maybe you just have a hostess who can put someone's name down for reservation on a piece of paper that shows the table number. But remember, during a time of crisis, things are going to get chaotic and fail. And I remember when PF Chang's had their outage with their ability to take credit cards, and they brought out the old knuckle busters. Remember those ka-chunk, where you'd go ahead and move it over a credit card. Doesn't work anymore. Why? Because a lot of credit cards are flat. They do not have the textured surface anymore. They just print the number on there. Probably cheaper. And a lot of merchants don't even have the knuckle busters left anyway. So make sure, if you're coming up with a fallback plan, that the technology will actually support it. Create a business continuity plan that says, when this process fails, do this. When this process fails, do that. And maybe have, again, a defense in depth for a second round in case the first two fail. So you want to minimize the chaos as you expedite your recovery. And as I think I've mentioned in shows before, Admiral Hyman Rickover had said, you're going to fight the way you train. And so you're going to respond the way that you've trained. You're not going to stop and think and wonder what to do and have a conference and figures like that. It ought to be do what's next, and keep on moving. Now, does looking across a number of processes to see how much time you have to recover sound a bit familiar? In essence, you're kind of doing a business impact assessment, or a BIA. See, when you're doing a BIA, you speak with business process leaders to assess the criticality of outages across a range of time periods, and then you prioritize your recovery strategies based on, well, the impact to the business. I talked more about a business impact assessment, or BIA, way back in episode number 63, Flirting with Disaster, for anybody who remembers Molly Hatchet. So if you haven't yet listened to that episode from January of 2022, recommend looking it up. It's less than half an hour. It's an easy listen. Now, what business processes might you focus on in your business continuity plan? Now, recently, one of our fellow podcasters, Alan Alford, had Malcolm Harkins on his Cyber Ranch podcast back on the 14th of August of 2024. And Malcolm had some interesting observations. Things like code always wants to be wrong, and processes want to fail. And they fail because of either poor discipline or you have the wrong process set. He points out that we use technologies to create efficiencies in our business, but you need to understand the output that you intend to get. So define your process first. Know exactly what you want to accomplish, then seek to automate it. Because if you know the steps you have to go through, you automate those rather than the other way around, which is sometimes how we do things. We buy a tool and then we try to warp our processes that we want to do into the capabilities of that tool set. See, now manufacturing, for example, requires a very specific process because you want to achieve quality and scale and consistency, where incident handling is going to have perhaps a bit more flexibility. So know which way you can tend in terms of rigid or flexible models in terms of recovery, and that could be a cultural challenge if you have different models. Your leadership challenge is to match the personality to a requirement. If you have a person who does things just so, they come from a GRC or compliance mentality, put them in charge of something that has a very, very specific process. If you have a more creative thinker out there and you have to be able to think on your feet, maybe that's a better match. You manage your risk effectively through effective leadership by going ahead and assigning your people correctly. Now, to go on, during that episode, Malcolm mentions when he was leading security and privacy at Intel, there are 7 core business processes that he needed to ensure were safe. And they were to book, order, bill, pay, ship, close, and communicate. Firstly, it's a pretty good list. It's 7 business processes, which isn't too many to remember. It's just kind of in the sweet spot, but it's a good list of things to focus on. Let me repeat them one more time in case you want to write them down. Book, order, bill, pay, ship, close, and communicate. Now, if your organization has different critical business processes, then use them instead, of course, than these notional ones. But let's use those for now. And when you start to think about these 7 business processes, the first thing you might do for each of them is to get the business to prioritize the importance of confidentiality, integrity, and availability for each step. For example, availability is key for booking. The customer can't book, and they'll find a different restaurant. So we'll put a requirement of high availability with regard to the business process of booking. Now, we might have other activities that involve communications, for example, sending customers reward vouchers to come on back for another meal or 10% off or something. This is probably something that doesn't require high availability, since a customer who receives a voucher one day late probably doesn't care about that delay, and quite honestly, they're kind of unlikely to have dinner at the same place on the same day that they just ate lunch. So that works out. All right, let's go down this list a little bit more. You've got 7 business processes. Each of them now has a business requirement for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we assign a score of low, medium, or high. All right, is that good enough? Probably not. And here's why. What does high confidentiality mean? I mean, let's turn that into something specific by mapping it to some technologies like authentication requirements. You might create a confidentiality standard that says what authentication requirements are needed when customers want to access information we consider high confidentiality. Well, I would probably want them to authenticate with a username, a password, and an MFA, text message code or something like that for the phone for login. Don't think your average restaurant customer is going to go ahead and use the YubiKey to go ahead and order lunch. But the idea is if there's sensitive information, they fill out a customer profile, we want your name, we want credit card, and want to go ahead and have address, etc. If you have a really sticky relationship with your customers, you're going to go ahead and interact with them a lot, you might consider that high confidentiality. How about medium confidentiality information? How would we map that concept to access control? Well, medium confidentiality, still need to have a login, perhaps with a username and a password, but I might not need that MFA. It's not that critical. And if you have low confidentiality information, like posting a review on a website, really don't require any login to submit that. Sometimes it's nice to have it because you want to follow up, but they're posting it publicly. It's low confidentiality. Just let them come on and do it. So let's look at something specific we can measure in terms of integrity. Your standard might say something like the following. High integrity information means that the system for the average user is going to be read-only. Examples could be read-only containers, static S3 websites, or read-only AWS Lambda jobs. We can enforce this requirement by ensuring that users, cannot write back to any values of the system of record. We might also require that high integrity assets must use TLS 1.2 or TLS 1.3 encryption using only approved ciphers. Although if you think about it, it sounds more like a confidentiality thing. But if you think further, it creates a barrier for a bad actor to alter information in transit to ensure the integrity of a communication for us. Okay, that makes sense. How about medium integrity information? It means we have specific requirement rules on what fields or items can be modified. Again, let's map this integrity concept of information for the fields over to some of the communications protections that we have. So we could add that connections must use TLS 1.2 or higher, because again, we don't want the information that is being exchanged, it's of medium integrity, to be altered in transit. Low integrity information has no integrity requirements, like a wiki page, for example. Pretty much anybody can update it. Thus, we don't care about the communication security requirements, since we don't care if low integrity information is altered, either in transit or on the site itself. So we're starting to see now that as we look at our requirements and we drill down in there, we can see how much time and effort and money we want to spend in achieving that particular goal. Let's consider, for example, availability. You might include the amount of acceptable downtime in your calculations of availability. Now, often this is shown in the number of nines of availability. Is it 3 nines, which means 99.9% available, 4 nines, 99.99, 5 nines, 99.999, or so on. I mean, here's a different example for availability in terms of supporting a rapid ransomware response. A high availability system needs to perform At a minimum, daily snapshots of systems to facilitate any backup or disaster recovery needs. Might want to do more often than that, but probably at a minimum daily. Medium availability systems, weekly snapshots. We can recover it. We'll get to it. Low availability systems, we'll do it monthly. And so the difference between daily, weekly, or monthly snapshots is going to be measured by the number of events that we're going to do, the backups, the communications costs, the storage costs, etc., and things such as that. And those costs are going to vary widely. Here's the thought problem for you. Did you ever stop to think what the difference is between 4 nines of availability and 5 nines of availability with respect to a daily requirement? It's less than 8 seconds per day. Now go back and take a look at the price of 4 nines versus 5 9 availability contract. It could be sizable. So before you bite off on another 9, do the math and figure out if that extra availability is cost effective for your business model and your critical process calculation, because you might find out that those extra 8 seconds don't matter. Now, your goal isn't to drown the business in paperwork. It's to set clear expectations. Take data availability, for instance. If ransomware hits on a Friday night and you don't notice it until Monday, well, the latest data available from which you can restore would be Friday. Now, if you create weekly snapshots, that might be sufficient, depending upon how much work you would need to play catch-up. If you do daily backups, it could be more expensive, require more bandwidth, more storage. Now, backing up more frequently than daily would be even more involved. And so let the business choose the snapshot frequency, because that gives them control over how much data they might need to recover and re-enter. Again, if it's an order entry system and there's paper records, there's a big pile of paperwork over here, and you got to redo the whole day's work, well, you've got to decide what's the cost of doing the backup more frequently versus the cost of paying somebody to key all that back in, and then the concern about what's the impact of the customer if it creates delays and things like that. These all interrelate with each other. Now remember, with higher availability comes higher cost. And using our previous model, storing high availability data is 7 times pricier than medium availability, doing daily versus weekly, and 30 times more expensive than low availability, once a month. So it's a balancing act between recovery ease and cost. Go into it with your eyes wide open. Inform the business partners that you're working with that are in the organization the difference in terms of the recovery time, their capabilities, and the burden on the IT systems, which ultimately is going to turn to the cost, which is going to be friction for the business's profitability. But it's more of an insurance sale than an ROI sale. You don't tend to make money on backups. What if you never need them? Kind of like a return on a seatbelt. You wear a seatbelt for 50 years, and if you never ever needed it, was it a bad idea to be wearing seatbelts all along? I would disagree. I would think, no, you always want to have them just in case. So the same thing here while we're working about it. Looking at availability, just in case something goes down, you want to be able to recover. Here's a simple example. Let's say you've got a CRM system and it's deemed to have a high confidentiality requirement to support your billing process. Seems like a good system to also do red team operations against, right? Perhaps you give a red team with the same access as anyone in the customer help desk. Now, could the red teamer exfil a bulk list of customer PII data through a CSV export of a customer table? And if so, would your team be alerted if that file were created or downloaded? What about if that CSV file were uploaded to a personal Dropbox or a Google Drive or even a ChatGPT account? Because you can store stuff and pull them back down later. And by the way, they get a copy. How about a USB drive? What controls in your organization would detect and or prevent that event? If there aren't any, that's a new observation worth sharing with your leadership to say, are you willing to sign off on accepting this level of risk? And if they are, get their signature so that if something goes wrong, it's the not me, right? You said you'd do that. But help your leadership make informed risk-based decisions. Here are some options you might be able to give them to mitigate the risks at different levels of effectiveness and costs. And those are the type of perfect discussions to bring to the risk committee as a CISO. So in conclusion, securing your business isn't about just ticking off compliance boxes or mindless vulnerability management and things like that. It's about embedding security into the heart of your operations. Now, you picture each critical business process as a vital link in your operational chain. And if one leak weakens or breaks, the whole chain can falter. So by clearly defining confidentiality integrity, and availability requirements for each process to ensure your resources are focused where they're needed most. And this isn't just about protecting data. It's about keeping your business running smoothly. And when you frame security in terms of real business impact, like how a vulnerability could halt bookings or disrupt billing, you'll turn abstract risks into concrete concerns that stakeholders can understand and act upon, which shows your CISO tradecraft at the risk committee meetings. Commander Dick Marchenko, who had been a leader in the SEAL community, he wrote, "The more thou sweatest in training, the less thou bleedeth in combat." Suggesting that preparation is key. Sounds a little bit similar to Admiral Rickover's comment about you will fight the way you train. If you map out your CIA needs and regularly update them across critical business processes, then you're going to minimize the chaos associated with a crisis and speed up your recovery. So integrate security into every aspect of your strategy. Test your systems regularly. Identify gaps and discuss them with leadership to prioritize fixes. And this proactive approach not only protects your assets, but also ensures your business thrives amidst threats. So stay ahead of the risks and stay secure and keep your operations running smoothly. So that's about it for today. Thank you again for tuning into CISO Tradecraft. This is your host, G. Mark Hardy. Pleased to be with you from, as I said, Glasgow. And until next time, stay sharp, stay prepared, and stay safe out there.